Right, hello. Just to begin, do you want to introduce yourself?
Yes. Hello, my name is Stavridis. I'm a lecturer in the College of Medicine, Dentistry and Nursing, and my subject area is embryonic stem cell biology.
Cool. I'm now going to ask you a couple of questions.
Sure.
Okay, so our first question is, what is science? If you can kind of sum it up.
How long have we got? Science. So, it's very difficult to define what science is. I think I can define science by explaining what is not science. Okay?
Mm-hmm.
So, not science is something that cannot be tested, does not follow the, I'm going to use the word to describe it, the scientific method. So, by contrast, science is a process by which you can find out more about the world around us by doing some initial observations, making some observations, formulating hypotheses, and then, and that's actually important, performing some experiments or more observations that set out to disprove your hypothesis. And if your hypothesis is still standing, that means that it's more robust. If your hypothesis is not standing, then you falsified it, so it was not good enough, and you need to modify it or reject it completely. I think this is an important part of the scientific process.
Our next question is, what are stem cells?
What are stem cells? So stem cells are special cells. All cells have, or most cells have the ability to divide. Stem cells are cells that when they divide, they have a choice. And that choice is whether they will make more copies of themselves or they will make a different cell type, a more differentiated cell type. There is no good definition of what a stem cell is other than this functional one, that a stem cell is a cell that has the ability to self-renew and to differentiate into a more specialized cell type.
So how do stem cells impact society?
How do stem cells impact society? So stem cells impact society in various ways. So the obvious first way in which they can have an impact is if we can think of stem cells as potential tools for therapy. So if you can use I'm going to use an example of things that have already impacted society quite a lot. So you've all heard of bone marrow transplantation. Okay? Bone marrow transplantation is essentially a stem cell transplantation. What you're doing is you're taking the hematopoietic stem cell, that is the cell that gives rise to all of the cell types in your blood, from one individual, and you're transfusing it, you're transplanting it into another patient. And then that stem cell will then hopefully take hold and start producing the cell types that originally the patient could not produce. So that is a very clear way in which one specific stem cell can impact society. There are many other stem cell therapies, including for the treatment of skin and some eye conditions, and much more in the pipeline potential impact from less specialized stem cells, such as embryonic stem cells, pluripotent stem cells. That is my personal subject. So they impact in health. That's one way.
Okay.
Another way in which stem cells can impact society is by stimulating debate about ethics. And in that, the embryonic stem cell field has had quite a lot of impact in the last decade or so. So
Cool.
I think you have more questions about that.
Yeah. Okay, so do you often... Wait, which one is it? Oh. So why do you think it is important for the public to be aware about the research into stem cells and like embryonic stem cells?
I think that it's important that the public is informed about research in every area of science, because an informed public is a better society. We don't want people to be afraid of things that they don't understand. And if people understand what potential therapies are, what are the potential positive things about them, and what are the potential negative things about them, what are the risks associated, what are the ethical issues, you can have an open discussion. And then I think that my area of research has been very good at making this a very open debate and stimulating discussion and taking this on board, informing a framework that is actually enshrined in law
Mm-hmm.
that regulates research that the public deems unacceptable.
Mm-hmm.
You keep on mentioning your research. Would you like to expand on what exactly that is?
My own research. Sure. So my particular interest is in trying to understand how embryonic stem cells stop being embryonic stem cells. So I'm studying the differentiation process of the cells. So I'm particularly interested in understanding how the environment of the cell and the signals provided by the environment, and that can be other cells in the environment, growth factors in the environment, nutrients, all of the whole gamut of interactions that a cell can have. How do all of these factors coordinate a cell's decisions to, now I'm not going to be a stem cell anymore, I'm going to differentiate.
Mm-hmm.
And when it chooses to differentiate, embryonic stem cells have a choice to differentiate into any cell type in the body. So how do they choose what cell type they're going to become? That's my particular area.
Do you often communicate with the public about your research? And if so, what form of media or method do you use?
Not as often as I should, probably. I have in the past been involved in a few public communication events. I will explain some of them. So one of the first ones have been, I was invited to Glasgow Science Centre to participate in a debate with a difference between proponents and opponents of stem cell research,
Mm-hmm.
and that involved school children. So the school children heard a little presentation from each camp and one neutral one, and then they went away and had time to think about it and make their own mind up, and then they presented in groups what they thought about this. I thought that was hugely rewarding. I was really surprised at how high level these school children were able to engage with such a complex ethical issue. I've also been involved in events involving the Science Centre here. I've organized a screening of a public understanding film about stem cell biology. For one of these events I was interviewed by one of the local radio stations. That's a little while ago now. I don't really use social media particularly well. Maybe I should. I do have a Twitter account, which I hardly ever use. I don't do Facebook.
Does the public perception of stem cell research and their sense of morality behind it impact how far you can go with your research? And if so, how strong is that impact?
It certainly does, to a great extent. So embryonic stem cell research, and in particular human embryonic stem cell research, in the United Kingdom is very, very strongly regulated. We have a very permissive but very regulated legal framework. And this has been brought about by consultation with the Human Fertilization Embryology Authority, which regulates all research concerning gametes and embryos, and also the public. And it's had input from both houses of parliament. So the regulation at the moment is that you can use embryos for derivation of embryonic stem cells, and that can be done as long as you have the right license. And to get a license, you need to demonstrate that your research is essential. You can't do it if it's for a trivial reason.
Mm-hmm.
And that is because it is unacceptable to use embryos, destroy them essentially, if you're not going to make something useful out of it. These are not embryos that would normally be used for reproductive purposes. Most often they are surplus to requirement, or they are of not good enough quality, so they wouldn't survive. They are very often embryos that belong to couples who had in vitro fertilization for infertility, but they have now completed their families, and these embryos are stored in freezers or in liquid nitrogen. And if we don't use them for research, then either they stay in suspended animation forever, as they do in some countries such as Italy, or they will get incinerated. So I think it's good that they are used when there is a need, and well-regulated framework to support that. There are other areas that involve human embryonic stem cell research that have been a lot more controversial, such as the generation of human and animal hybrids, cytoplasmic hybrids, and this is nuclear transfer of a human nucleus into an animal oocyte, and that's because the oocyte has the ability to reprogram the human nucleus and start making an early embryo. That embryo would not be viable, but it would be useful for research purposes. Some people have had ethical objections to that. This is permissible, but again, it's highly regulated. You need to demonstrate that you need to do this type of research to study, for example, the impact of mitochondrial DNA mutations on embryonic development, things like this. So it is highly regulated, and that regulation has come as a consequence of the opinion of the public.
So, why is research into embryonic stem cells useful and important?
So, research into embryonic stem cells is important because the capacity of these cells to make any cell type in the body could potentially be harnessed to generate cell types for use in therapies, transplantation-based therapies, for many, many diseases. So far, this has been very, very limited. So this is very early stage still for most areas of embryonic stem cell research. But if we don't do the research, we will never know if it is possible to do that.
Cool, perfect.